North Carolina is blessed with water. Rivers and streams carry the liquid of life to every corner of our state.
Ponds and lakes by the thousands dot our landscape. In the Piedmont, multi-cove lakes spread like spiders.
They include Carr Reservoir, Lake Norman, and High Rock. In the mountains where clear streams once cascaded over valley floors, dams now back up water that is often 100 feet deep. Lake James, Fontana, and Santilla are sources of water, power, and recreation. Their dams are engineering marvels.
Today, however, we are not going to explore these man-made marvels, but two very old lakes and a pond in the lowlands of eastern North Carolina.
On the coastal plain, where land is very flat, lakes look different from space. Here, there are no more twisted spiders, but round ovals made by the hand of nature. In southeastern North Carolina, you will see the mysterious Carolina Bays. Look closely and you will see ovals of vegetation where ancient lakes once dotted the landscape. Where did these so-called Carolina Bays get their name? I asked Chris Helms, Superintendent of Lake Waccamaw State Park.
The name Carolina Bay is actually a misnomer in a couple different ways. Carolina, for one thing, they occur in more areas than just the Carolinas. They occur actually from Maryland to Florida in the coastal plain parts of those sections. And then the name Bay is not to signify the water necessarily as a body of water, but also the vegetation that grows here. There's three different types of bay trees: Red Bay, Loblolly Bay, and Sweet Bay, and each one of those are similar enough, but they also belong to different families, but they're found in the surrounding bay forest.
These bay leaves are the main spice in Old Bay shrimp seasoning, but I still wanted to know more about the origin of the mysterious ovals.
Carolina Bays were actually first seen when folks got up in the aircraft in the late 30s and early 40s and started taking aerial photography. They saw a characteristic northwest to southeast pattern of these ovals, and they wondered what caused them. Well, the meteorite theory was probably one of the first ones that came to be, is that meteorites coming from outer space would have scarred the Earth and caused these, but there's a little bit of problem with that. They're very shallow lakes, only sometimes up to about 11 feet deep. We've never found any meteorite evidence, so some folks don't really necessarily agree with that theory these days. One is prehistoric fish type theory, where actually called the whale wallow theory, and that said that giant prehistoric fish would have hollowed out during spawning these type of fish beds that then in turn turned into Carolina Bays. Well, the problem with that too is that up to a 9,000 acre Carolina Bay, it would be a very big fish to do that. Well, the one that has the most credence these days is called the oriented lake theory, or the wind and wave action theory, that said consistent winds from the northeast would have hollowed these areas out, causing wind patterns and eddying in the lake that eventually would have led to an oval shape.
Even though 20th century man was the first to see these waters from high above, they have been used by American Indians for thousands of years.
The local Native Americans use the lakes for transportation, for fishing. We've actually even found small canoes in the lake, and some even up to as long as 20 feet. The local tribe would have been the Waccamaw Siouan tribe that inhabited the area and utilized the lake, and they still have a presence here actually nearby. The Waccamaw Siouans had the legend that the lake was the land of the falling star, which would tie it real closely to the meteorite theory of more recent times.
Most of the Carolina Bay lakes are oval, and most are filled with acidic, peaty soil. But Lake Waccamaw is different.
Lake Waccamaw is a Carolina Bay, like of course many of the others in the area, but it also has very much of a distinction in the water quality that's here, or the water chemistry as well. The water chemistry of this lake is much more buffered than some of the other Carolina Bay lakes in our area. Jones Lake, Salters Lake, Singletary Lake over in Blaine County have a lot of acidity, and so there are only certain species that can live there, certain fish species. Here at Lake Waccamaw, we are buffered by a limestone outcrop that is on the north side of the lake, but also underlies the lake. And so it helps to neutralize the acidity that's here and makes it a lot more diverse as far as what fish population and mollusk population can live here. One of the keys to the diversity here at Lake Waccamaw, in addition to the limestone outcrop that neutralizes the lake, is the sheer number of aquatic invertebrates that are here as a food source for the mussels and fish. In more acid lakes, a lot of these small microscopic organisms can't really live, but in a near neutral condition like Lake Waccamaw is, it does allow for a lot of these species to thrive.
Chris took me on a wading tour where he showed me many species of freshwater shellfish, some found nowhere else in the world. Insects, such as this Halloween pennant dragonfly, were everywhere. Every inch of the shoreline was alive. Later that day, I took my kids on a boat tour of this 9,000-acre gem, where we looked for mollusk, alligators, and eagles. Life on the shore was just as diverse as that in the water.
The animal diversity and endemic species at Lake Waccamaw get a lot of attention, but we also are home to a lot of plant communities that are found in not a lot of other places in North Carolina. We've got the natural lake shoreline along the undeveloped part of the park that is found here with specific aquatic-based plants that are here, lily pads, grasses that are here, and not many other places in North Carolina. You go through our bay forest, which is home to the bay trees that we've mentioned before. And then you get into carnivorous plants that are found often in the savannas or in the edges of some of these habitats. Carnivorous plants include our Venus flytrap, pitcher plants, sundews, and bladderworts too. On the drier sections, on the sand rim, which is usually on the southeastern side of the lake, you start to get into your typical longleaf pine, wiregrass type plant community. And a lot of these communities are also fire dependent. Carnivorous plants come back well after fire. We also see orchid species that respond after fire.
Although the shoreline looks wild, many houses and piers ring Lake Waccamaw. But Chris says landowners know how to coexist with nature.
Lake Waccamaw is a special place, as we've already talked about, with the diversity and the animals and plants that are here, but also we have human interactions here too. So it's a balancing act between the enjoyment by humans, the development by humans in this sensitive and fragile area.
Farther up our coastline is another Carolina Bay type lake called Lake Phelps. Fortunately, North Carolina has a major park at Lake Phelps called Pettigrew State Park. We visited with Sid Sharon, park superintendent, who told us how Lake Phelps got its name.
Well, Pettigrew State Park contains Lake Phelps, which is a big natural lake. It was named for a guy named Josiah Phelps. Legends have it that two people were hunting, and they got lost. One climbed a tree and said, "Hey, there's a big lake out there." And Josiah Phelps heard that, ran toward the lake, jumped in it, and claimed it to be Lake Phelps. Lake Phelps is the second largest natural lake in North Carolina. It has been debated a lot about if it's a Carolina Bay or not. It really looks like two Carolina Bays, the two oval shapes in it. It does have the sand rim, it does have the bay trees. I guess they're always going to debate it. The latest theory on how it was formed is that when this area was covered with the oceans, that there was wind and wave action that kind of carved it out. And then when the oceans receded, we had a lake because everything drains away from Lake Phelps. Nothing drains into it.
Having heard lake formation theories from Chris Helms and Sid Sharon, I decided to go to the guru of North Carolina coastal geology, Dr. Stanley Riggs. I asked Stan about the formation of Carolina bays and these two great lakes, Waccamaw and Phelps.
I like to call these Pocosin lakes, not Carolina Bay lakes. Carolina bays are very different features than Lake Waccamaw and Phelps Lake. Lake Waccamaw and Phelps Lake formed as erosional features associated with a block drainage that took place during the glacial maximum period of time when we had semi-arid to arid environmental conditions and extreme storm events. And these extreme storm events would block the drainages with debris and back up water and produce an ephemeral body of water. And during that portion of the Pleistocene, when we were in these ice ages, we had extreme storms, extreme winds, and the winds would erode, physically erode these lakes, and they're deep erosional features that are cut into the surrounding rock. And these things weren't permanent lakes when they started. They started as ephemeral lakes, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger because they kept blocking, this drainage kept repeatedly being blocked during these storm events.
I still wanted to hear from Stan how the elliptical Carolina bays were formed.
This is in contrast to the Carolina bays, which are these little elliptical impressions. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger and deeper than other times, but they're not erosional features. They're depositional features that form in these shallow playas and mud flats associated with the falling sea level. And where we hold the water back here, we have almost an intertidal flat that produces these things.
What a sight Jones and Bladen County must have been at the peak of these ancient depositional lakes. Even today, they must still be considered one of the major natural wonders of North Carolina. I still had questions for Sid Sharon about the natural wonders of Pettigrew State Park, which is surrounded by Pocosins.
The south side of Lake Phelps is an area that's known for being a deep Pocosin. A Pocosin is a area where organic matter has built up over the years. It gets to be kind of a mound and it stays wet, and it's really what the Indians called a swamp on a hill. It's characterized by a lot of different vegetation of things called the bay trees, and it just covers the areas, and there's about 4 or 5 different species for bay trees.
Here there is enough bay leaf to season all the world's shrimp. But there is a major difference between Lake Waccamaw and Lake Phelps.
Lake Phelps does not have any natural creeks or canals or anything feeding